Blog Talk Radio.
Good evening. Welcome to The View Up Here. I'm your host, Canadian Glenn, and it is December 5th, 2018. Tonight, another The View Up Here Global episodes. Welcome to the era of the permanent war complex with John Nichols. Dwight Eisenhower was the last career military man to hold the office of President of the United States. The five-star general knew the business of war. On January 17, 1961, in his final presidential address, after 8 years in which the Cold War raged, a dire warning was given to the American people, and by proxy, to the world. I'm just going to quote two lines from that speech. We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. Truly prophetic words given little notice at the time. Well, maybe if the White House staff had not convinced Ike to change his speech from calling this rising force the Military-Industrial-Congressional complex, as he planned, it may have drawn more attention. It was about a 14 or 16-minute speech, I'm not even sure, but I'm going to play a short excerpt.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
Good evening, my fellow Americans. We now stand 10 years past the midpoint of a century that has witnessed 4 major wars among great nations. Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
The unabated growth of the military-industrial complex continued through to the end of the Cold War. Then 9/11 and the global war on terror ushered in our 21st century perpetual conflict model, with no decisive direction on mission or goals, only endurance. As theaters of operations expanded, so did demand for assets. The military was proficient at buying physical assets, but was poor on retaining human assets. They started going in droves to the corporations that sell the physical assets. Drawn by higher salaries, saner deployments, and expanded career options, it was an alarmingly simple choice for many. Before I introduce our guest, I'm going to turn to an article by Gareth Porter in the American Conservative on November 15th, titled America's Permanent War Complex. What President Dwight Eisenhower dubbed the military-industrial complex has been constantly evolving over the decades, adjusting to shifts in the economic and political system, as well as international events. The result today is a permanent war complex, which is now engaged in conflicts in at least 8 countries across the globe, none of which are intended to be temporary. This new complex has justified its enhanced power and control over the country's resources, primarily by citing threats to U.S. security posed by Islamic terrorists. But like the old military-industrial complex, it's really rooted in the evolving relationship between the national security institutions themselves and the private arms contractors allied with them. The first phase of this transformation was a far-reaching privatization of U.S. military and intelligence institutions in the 2 decades after the Cold War, which hollowed out the military's expertise and made it dependent on big contractors. The second phase began with the global war on terrorism, which quickly turned into a permanent war, much of which revolves around the use of drone strikes. The drone wars are a uniquely private-public military endeavor in which major arms contractors are directly involved in the most strategic aspects of the war. And so the drone contractors, especially the dominant General Atomics, have both a powerful motive and the political power exercised through its clients in Congress to ensure that the wars continue for the indefinite future. The privatization of military and intelligence institutions began even before the end of the Cold War. But during the 1990s, both Congress and the Bush and Clinton administrations opened the floodgates to arms and intelligence contractors and their political allies. The contracts soon became bigger and more concentrated in a handful of dominant companies. Between 1998 and 2003, private contractors were getting roughly half of the entire defense budget each year. The 50 biggest companies were getting more than half of the approximately $900 billion paid out in contracts during that time, and most were no-bid contracts, sole-sourced. The contracts that had the biggest impact on the complex were for specialists working right in the Pentagon. The number of these contractors grew so rapidly and chaotically in the 2 decades after the Cold War that senior Pentagon officials did not even know the full extent of their numbers and reach. In 2010, then Secretary of Defense Robert Gates confessed to Washington Post reporters Dana Priest and William Arkin that he was unable to determine how many contractors worked in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, which includes the entire civilian side of the Pentagon. Although legally forbidden from assuming tasks that were inherent government functions, In practice, these contractors steadily encroached on what had always been regarded as government function. Contractors could pay much higher salaries and consulting fees than government agencies, so experienced Pentagon and CIA officers soon left their civil service jobs by the tens of thousands for plum positions with firms that often paid twice as much as the government for the same work. That was especially true in the intelligence agencies, which experienced a rapid 50% workforce increase after 9/11. It was almost entirely done with former skilled officers brought back as contractor personnel. Even President Obama's CIA Director Leon Panetta admitted to Priest and Arkin that the intelligence community had for too long depended on contractors to do the operational work that had always been done by agency employees, including intelligence analysis, and that the CIA needed to rebuild its own expertise over time. By 2010, core contractors, those who performed such functions as collection and analysis, comprised at least 28% of professional civilian and military intelligence staff, according to a fact sheet from the Office of the DNI, Director of National Intelligence. The dependence on the private sector in the Pentagon and the intelligence community had reached such a point that it raised a serious question about whether the workforce was now obligated to shareholders rather than to public interest. Things got worse as they went on. Jonathan Nichols was in the U.S. Army for almost 9 years working in PSYOP efforts, deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan. Propaganda analysis, atmospherics, psychometrics, and threat analysis are all a part of John's toolset. Highly marketable skills in today's world. So why is he a contractor instead of a career soldier? What is the cumulative effect of developed expertise leaving the military to become an indisposable supplier to it? At what cost, monetarily, strategically, or command-wise? Well, John returns to the view up here to discuss the permanent war complex. Hello, John. How are you?
Good. How are you, sir?
Very good. Thank you for returning to the view up here.
Oh, yeah. Sounds like an interesting topic.
Well, I would say that you have some directly relatable experience in our subject tonight.
Absolutely.
to put it mildly.
Of those tours, 2 of those were out of uniform, and 1 of them was in. And man, just listening to your entire intro, I don't know where to start. I have something to say about pretty much every sentence there.
Well, I mean, Eisenhower's speech has, it's one of those moments in history. It's lasted, but it's been in a slightly different compartment than a lot of other ones. It has proven to be accurate. As I said, 5-star general, former supreme commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force in World War II, Ike knew the business of war. There's no doubt about that. And for him to come out in his final address to the American people and warn specifically of this and of his plans to call it the Military-Industrial-Congressional complex, and he was talked out of that, it was pretty obvious then already to the president what was happening. How much of it has changed from your viewpoint? Has it just gotten deeper?
Well, not much has changed at all. I would actually say when it comes to presidential exiting speeches, number 1 would definitely be George Washington's prescient speech discussing the 2-party problem, urging Americans not to get into a 2-party system. And we failed to listen to that advice, and we see where that's gotten us. And Eisenhower's Beware the Congressional Military-Industrial Complex would definitely be number 2 on that list. as we're speaking specifically to the congressional, we'll start there, I guess. We could start anywhere. There's all sorts of things. I would say that it's only gotten worse. There are a large number of, just in my personal experience, I know, for example, the Stryker or the Bradley fighting vehicle is a relatively obsolete vehicle. They cost, if a Humvee costs $2 billion or whatever, those things must cost $5 million or so a pop. And those still exist in the military system not because the military wants them, but because the allies of the congressmen simply don't want the factories and the yards, the holding yards that build and maintain these Bradleys to go out of business. One of those yards being fairly close to my old stomping grounds in West Virginia, just up north, pretty close to Pittsburgh, is one of those Bradley maintenance yards. And just the reason why that place still exists and the reason why it's still turning out the Bradley fighting vehicle, even though we have a replacement, it's called the Stryker fighting vehicle, and it's better in every single way, including the ability to save lives. The Bradley fighting vehicle still exists in the arsenal simply because Congress will not let it die. And it's a problem because, if a congressperson gives up it becomes a congressperson who lets the Bradley fighting vehicle contracts go away, thousands of jobs in their district will be lost. And so the individuals are incentivized to vote to maintain the Bradley fighting vehicle. Congress is incentivized, because of the way we vote, to maintain this stupid vehicle. And as a result, it's still on our budget, and it's still getting people killed regularly. I would refuse an order to get into a Bradley fighting vehicle if I were in combat. I've seen those things kill too many people.
Are the Bradleys...
There's one way to start. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, are the Bradleys now turning up in municipal police forces with the redistribution of assets from the Pentagon?
I haven't seen it. I think the vehicle you're used to seeing out there is an earlier version of the MRAP, which is not a Bradley. A Bradley looks like a mini tank. Remember that dude who drove through Richmond? He was from our part of the internet. In a mini tank, he was driving around in a Bradley. No, he was driving around in an APC. I apologize, but they look very similar.
Okay. All right. I wasn't sure about that. Well, we've seen this with multiple weapon systems over the years. It's, F-35, need I say more? But what happens when it's moved from the physical assets to the digital assets of the military ecosphere?
Well, can we start with the personnel assets before we get into that?
Okay.
We could probably tie them both together. The personnel thing, I think, is really concerning. What ends up happening are that you don't get your ticket to join the Blackwaters of the world, as I did. I joined the company that I ended up joining, got eaten by Blackwater, and is now part of Blackwater, became Z, became something else, became Academy. The company that I joined was Lincoln Group, became Volker Worldwide, became Strategic Social, and is now a part of Academy. You don't get your ticket into the cool guy club, which is no longer Special Operations Command. It is to get your ticket into the tactical military-industrial complex. That's where the real cool guys are. What ends up happening is that you go on your first tour, you prove and you demonstrate yourself to be adept, to be the A-level soldier on your team. You are the cream of the crop. You come back home, and this is what happened to me. You come back home, and after a few months being home, you get a call. For me, it came from a buddy who served in the intel shop for the PSYOP team in 2008. And he said, hey, John, could you get to Baghdad by Monday? And he offered me triple the salary of what a conventional soldier makes. As an individual, I obviously have to make as an individual economic decision. any individual would be stupid to not make the decision to say yes there, right? Especially if you're willing to go back anyway. If you would go back in uniform, why wouldn't you go back with greater freedom, more flexibility, more tools at your disposal, and significantly better pay? Every individual would make the same choice. The problem is that when you take the A team out of the military rank system, then the A team is no longer there. There's this thing in the military called institutional knowledge. And you want the best soldiers to train the next generation of soldiers so that knowledge stays inside the military. And as the military evolves and learns over time, the best train the newest crop, and that crop grows up. The military itself improves over time. What happens now, and what's happening now, is that the A team gets bought off and joins the military-industrial complex, and so the B and C squad soldiers are left to train the next generation, and you end up with a reduced caliber of soldier over time in a macroscopic system, while more and more professionalism is built inside of the military-industrial complex. So this system feeds itself. The best soldiers end up feeding the military-industrial complex, which requires, because the military is now reducing itself, because it's the B and C squad training the next generation, they become more and more reliant on the A squad, which is now a defense contractor, to come in and do the job that they normally would have done themselves. So it becomes a self-perpetuating cycle, and we really have to be conscious of it.
Well, okay. Now, let me see if I can describe this correctly. Basically, I think what you're describing about enlisting, training, deployment, experience, isn't that representative of what you would call the military ethos? You know, learning
I don't know where you're going with that. Go ahead.
Okay, well, learning to be the best guy in the squad, the best guy in your company. Those are the guys that traditionally have drawn attention, and more likely than not, they're going to move up the ladder within the military at a higher rate than the dudes on the B team or the C team. But now, you know, that's what I always thought the military was looking for. The young men who understand, the young men who understand the institution and can do it correctly and well and train others to do it. So isn't this really the military-industrial complex paying for the ethos to become that elite force that is necessary, especially in this day and age? I mean, isn't it just turning the actual military into a permanent customer because they know, oh yeah, we used to have that squad. Where'd those guys go? Isn't that what this is?
They all went to Blackwater.
Yeah.
So there's a few things to unpack there. First, I want to check you on the way you're using the term military ethos. The military ethos is much more broad, and it's not individually focused. It's one fight, one team.
Yes.
Just be cautious of the way you're using that term. I think anybody who's in the military would scold me if I didn't check you on the way you're using that term. That's just a minor caveat to the wider point. As a wider point, yes, the traditional system is that the A squad becomes the sergeants and then the staff sergeants and the first sergeants or whatever of the next generation. So we have this sustained chain of the cream rising to the top. But the cream keeps getting skimmed off by the military-industrial complex. And where did the A squad go? The A squad went over to Blackwater. And now, because you don't have an A squad, you got to hire the Blackwater guys to do it.
That's a dangerous precedent. And I guess it's beyond precedent. It's become normal operating procedure now. I mean, haven't some of the contractors been on deployments in enduring theaters of conflict longer than just about all the troops that cycle through?
Yeah, you know, that's funny, actually. I would say that that's one of the few things that contractors have done really well for us, and by us I mean NATO, in Iraq and Afghanistan, but Afghanistan particularly. I'm reminded of when I was sitting at Combined Joint Psychological Operations Task Force in Kabul, and there was this really grumpy Scotsman. I couldn't understand a damn word he said when I first got there. He was grumpy as shit. So I was like scared to even look at him. Thankfully, there was a Brit in the office who could help translate until I got an ear for angry Scot speak. But the way this dude, he would come up with these cool ideas. He would go, "No, we tried that back in 2003. It didn't work. Here's what happened. Got a whole bunch of people killed. Fuck you. We're not doing that." It was just great. And this is not the way it's supposed to go, right? In prior wars, I mean, going back to the dawn of time, really, but in prior conflicts, be it World War II or some other things, when you go to a theater, you sustain in that position until the fight's over. You don't rotate home. You often hear the trope, and I think you're familiar with it, that we didn't fight 10 1-year, I don't even know how many years you've been there anymore. We didn't fight 10 1-year wars, or we didn't fight one 10-year war. We fought 10 1-year wars. Or I think at this time it's like 15 or 16 1-year wars, right? Or 18 now? Shit, it's like 17. But the contractors have done, particularly those that decide to spend 10 years of their life in Afghanistan, do a good job of maintaining the institutional knowledge as troops rotate in and out. I would prefer that troops didn't rotate in and out, absent the hardship that sort of puts on the individual soldier and the soldiers' families. One good thing to say for the contractor corps that is over there, and I love those people. They're my friends. I have many criticisms of the system overall, but they are absolutely good at being the institutional knowledge that lets us know what we tried 10 years ago and what did and didn't work, and how maybe we could do better, in 2018, for whatever that's worth.
Is there an inherent risk to the military by allowing that to happen in a foreign theater where it is contractors who have the long-term operational history instead of the people you actually put in theater? Does that just make them more fundamental as long as that mission goes on? Like, there's no way the contractors could all leave and the U.S. military would be able to perform at the same level, is there?
Oh, certainly not. And there's a lot of, there are some strengths in institutional knowledge of having people there. I don't think anybody, be it from your country or mine or any NATO country, would want their soldiers over there for 10 years at a go. We're no longer in Alexander the Great's campaigns, and we're no longer in World War II, which was not a 10-year war or an 18-year war. We do want them over for little blips at a time. So I don't know that we have. I don't want to criticize without having a solution. So I'm not quite sure where to go with that one, if that makes sense. I agree that there's something fishy about it, but I'm not sure what the solution would be otherwise.
Well, as you said, I understand totally. It is, like I said in the show description, it was a surprisingly easy decision for veterans or active members who have returned from tour or whatever the case may be to take a tripling of salary for something that they've already done. As you said, they have more freedom because they're not in a unit per se. They're not on a base per se. it seems to be a very easy decision. You know, I mean, I
went from just about ready to get my E5 to GS14, I think it was 13 or 14. I think the first one was 13, which is rank equivalent to major, I believe. I think it's major or captain, which is just astronomical, even in terms of where you sit in the chain of command. I was the low man on a PSYOP team when I went over. When I went back over the next time, I was the chief counter propaganda analyst, United States Forces Iraq. You can't. Holy shit! Is that a jump? No, there's anybody would do that. That's just it makes common sense to the individual soldier. Institutionally, it's probably damaging to the entire system. But on the individual level, everybody here is making the right economic decision. I get why, but I don't think there are any necessarily evil people in this entire, outside of a few really bad apples. The military-industrial complex, when it's working, it really is trying to provide for the military. The individual soldier is making the right individual call by joining. The military is probably making the right individual call by helping. The senators who allowed the congressmen in general who allowed this crap to stay are responding to what their voters tell them to do. Everybody here is doing what you want them to do. This is a systemic breakdown where not any individual is making a bad choice here, but that as a system we are in some serious trouble, and Eisenhower saw that.
Well, we've seen this come up in other issues before. I mean, just right now in Canada, there's suddenly a big panic that somehow everybody realized that our problem isn't really procuring our next jet fighter. Our problem is we don't have enough trained pilots. And I know it's been an issue in the United States military as well, with the commercial airline industry taking an awful lot of pilots who take millions of dollars to train by the U.S. military and years of time for them to get to a certain level. Then it seems a lot of them, as soon as they return from deployment, if they're in the Navy or if they're in the Air Force, as soon as they hit a certain rank, they get propositioned. So has it become an issue where some of the corporate entities that are involved in the military machine are starting to look at the military as their training ground?
No, without a doubt. Yes. You have a tough time getting a job. Even just the basics of getting a security clearance. I live in Washington, D.C., for those who are listening who don't know me. Even just getting a job that has a clearance here. Nobody will sponsor you. They want you to get your clearance in the military, and then they hire you out. Unless you're coming in with an Ivy League degree, and then maybe they'll consider it. But if all the security guards are former infantrymen cleared at the appropriate level to secure whatever it is they're securing, all of the civilian contractors working at NSA, TAO, are the tailored access, are former people who probably were in uniform working at the NSA, or in whatever equivalent, whether it's cybercom or whatever. But the military is the training ground. I will say that I haven't had a chance to bring this up, so I'll bring it up here. The arguments I've heard, and I don't actually have the numbers in front of me, but the argument I've heard when I've discussed this with command staff levels and Senate staffers and such, sort of around the D.C. Watering holes that I frequent, is that the concept is that it is allegedly, the concept is that it is cheaper in the long run to hire somebody to go and do the job once for 3 times the salary than for the entire cost of a pension for a soldier. Right, so I did 9 years. If I did 20 and I had enough retirement points or whatever, then I would be able to pool a government pension for the remainder of my life. It's still an option, right? I can go back and do 11 more years, and then I'll pull a government pension. But the idea is that it's a big cost up front, but it's more budget security in the long run. That's at least the argument that I've been told. I haven't had a chance to sit down with the calculator and figure out whether they're blowing smoke up my ass. I think I guess we'll leave it to the audience to come to their own conclusions there.
Well, I mean, if you look at the demands, the expansion of actions, the amount of manpower deployed outside of CONUS, the continental United States, the costs are not going down regardless. But, as you said, when you're on the other side of the world and all the institutional tactical knowledge of the last decade now lies mostly with people who are contractors instead of your own, I don't see how you're going to be controlling costs in the long run. I mean, with this, maybe if it was a slow, steady pace, maybe if the U.S. wasn't involved in so many theaters, I could see maybe that making sense, that I could see it then as a short-term upfront charge. But these conflicts don't end. These costs don't end. They only increase. So I have a problem with anybody being serious about saying that the contracting out of military work is financially beneficial. I just don't see it.
What they will tell you, this is not me speaking, I'm channeling them through me. This is not an opinion that Jonathan Nichols holds. This is an opinion that he's heard and is just regurgitating. Before anybody fucking clips this up, makes it sound like I'm saying something I don't believe, because that's never happened before. What they would say is that even for those people that have been over there for 10 years, there are political costs that there's financial calculation, there's political calculation. A political cost to having soldiers there for 10 years is no democratic government would ever support having their sons and daughters over there for 10 years at a go. So having people who volunteer as a contractor to do it is a political good thing. Another political positive from their position is that the individual contractor doesn't count on casualty lists. So, and they don't count on troop drawdown numbers. So if the troops draw down, we can say that all we want. If the contractors go up, we still have the same number of damn Americans and Canadians and Brits over there. We still have the same number of NATO individuals over there, whether they're working under the UN flag, the NATO flag, the US, the Canadian, what have you. Still the same number of people over there. We just get to claim the political victory that we're coming home, even though we've actually just swapped them out for contractors. There's a lot of political costs that go into those decisions. And those people who make those decisions are rewarded by their voters at the voting booths, which is maybe unfortunate. I guess it just depends on the way the individuals think, the way the individual voter thinks about these situations, and how much of a shit they're willing to give about these fights. When a contractor dies, there's no caskets rolling off of airplanes. When a contractor dies, nobody gives a shit, unless their bodies are charred and hung from a bridge, right? Nobody really knows when a contractor dies. You lose 4 Canadian uniformed soldiers. Everybody in Canada loses their goddamn mind, and rightfully so. I'm not criticizing that fact. but that nobody gives a damn when a contractor dies. Politicians are politically rewarded by having this behavior. And additionally, a contractor is an at-will employee. If they're over there for 10 years, you can cut them, and you don't have to pay their goddamn pension. You just don't. You don't pay their pension. It's up to them to save their money, and if they didn't save their money, they don't get a fucking pension. That's just how that goes. So there's no institutional burden. They are an upfront cost and not a long-term cost. If they get cancer later, that's on them.
Well, I can understand that that's their economic argument, but again, I just don't think that the time window reality is proving backs up that calculation. That's all. Like I said, if this is a 5-year thing, I could see where, you probably could. How many servicemen could you prevent from hitting that 20-year barrier by using contractors, and you calculate the cost of their pensions? Yeah, okay. But as we said, what is this, 17 years? What is this, 17 years now? That's a lot of upfront costs. But hey, as you said, the political angle, when you explain it like that, that makes a whole lot of sense. A whole lot of sense. Because, when the Canadian troops finally came home from Afghanistan, when they left Kandahar, it was,
thank you for that giant 50-inch TV, Canadian IT. I love you guys. I was in Kandahar when you guys left. I walked your teams to the helicopter, and immediately planted my flag on your compound. Rich, this one's mine. And because I was a high-ranking contractor, I got to do it.
Well, there we go.
Thank you, Canadians, for the gorgeous TV.
Well, no problem. No problem. I mean, it's not like they could take it with them, so there you go.
Oh, no, and I wasn't going to ship that shit back.
Well, no, what for?
That was good times.
But I see what you're saying, and this is nothing else if not a generational decline of military institutions and intelligence institutions as well, is it not?
Yeah, we haven't had a chance to touch on that. The principal intelligence tool that I've observed was Palantir, which I believe anybody in our side of InfoSec at least has at least a passing familiarity with. Palantir, what they did was really tricky. They essentially gave away the software for like 2 years to units overseas. And then after those units rotated out, all of the institutional intelligence was stored inside of Palantir's data ecosystem. And then they're like, okay, now you actually need to start paying us for this. By the way, it's $100,000 or whatever it was a seat. And the military is like, holy shit, well, they've got us by the balls. What do? We can't go back to the original way that we were doing intelligence because 2 years of institutional knowledge of intelligence is now stored in the Palantir data structure. And just getting that back into a data structure that we would know would cost as much as this goddamn contract. So let's just bite the bullet, train all of our fuckers in Palantir, which also costs money, get Palantir, allow Palantir to maintain their contract, and then Palantir will, out of the goodness of their heart, deploy 2 subject matter experts who are, by the way, former military people. I'm speaking from straight experience here. Who will drive around the base and will walk into all of your tailored access meetings and will assist you on using the Palantir tool to get the appropriate intelligence that you're looking for to conduct whatever operation it is. Even the intelligence process is absorbed into the military-industrial complex. In this case, I point the finger very seriously at Palantir. I've also seen this in my work completely outside of government, doing incident response for, I got to be careful what I say here because I'm still under NDA on some of this. I've seen several large cities, like the large city sheriff's departments, are using Palantir as well. And one city, do you remember I don't know if you pay too much attention, but if you remember, you're vaguely familiar with ransomware campaigns, right? Do you remember the Sam ransomware campaign?
Yes, the name I remember.
It was pretty much the first one. Remember when the Hollywood Presbyterian Hospital got hit?
Yes.
That would have been, let's see, the February 12th. It's because the story came out on my birthday. That's why I know. February 12th, on my 30th birthday, so that would have been 2016. Yeah, that's about right. So that day, what had happened was exactly the same thing. Palantir did the same thing they pulled on the military, but they did it to municipal governments, the larger ones, right? Who do have their own intelligence units to help organize their they're dealing with large criminal organizations or whatever. I don't know. I'm not a sheriff's intelligence officer. Those individuals found that they were stuck with the same deal. They ended up having all of their data ingested into Palantir, and then couldn't find. And then instead of paying Palantir's, I'm going to go with extortionist. I'm going to use that word. And I'm sorry, Palantir. Extortionist fees. They decided to just use an antiquated version and not take updates. And the Sam ransomware got into a depreciated JBoss variable, JBoss instance on their Palantir server because that city municipal government couldn't, for whatever reason, decided not to pay to get regular updates from Palantir. Probably because Palantir's fees to keep it updated were extortionist, and bringing the intelligence over to a system that they would have used previously would have been exuberantly just too expensive. Sorry, that was a lot. I know, I just threw at you, but there it is.
No. I mean, what it sounds to me like, it's not only that there's a growing dependence on contractor participation, but it seems that the military doesn't have any contract lawyers either. I mean, I agree, that's a hell of a move by Palantir, but they had to discover that vulnerability and take advantage of it.
Well, even the contract officers. The contract officers, I know the contract officer when I was over in Kabul for Siege POTUS, the PSYOP task force. And that dude was a lieutenant, first lieutenant, fairly fresh out of West Point. And he was only there for slightly less than a year. And when he went home, he signed a contract with. It's the fact that not him individually, he didn't do anything wrong as far as I know. But when he signed the contract, whatever he signed is something the government's beholden to, and he gets the pat on the back. Much the same way that everybody's happy when the president or when we run deficits to pay for whatever and run up the debt. No one really cares about when the bill comes due. The contract officer is only there for a year, man. He gets his medal for doing a good thing and can turn a blind eye to sort of what the bigger picture is going to be. Yes, there are contract officers that are supposed to be looking out for that. I'm not. Then there are suites of people who deal with contracts. For all of these organizations, that they occupy, people who read these contracts occupy whole sections of office buildings. Did they exist? I don't know exactly what they look for, but yeah, there we go. I don't know. That's what I've got.
Well, it just kind of makes me think, every once in a while, usually around an election cycle, we hear about the revolving door, the quote-unquote revolving door between the intelligence agencies and contractors, between the Pentagon and contractors. Is there any way that companies like Palantir or Halliburton or CACI or any of these other long-term players, is there any way that they won't get what works best for them, considering the revolving door? I mean, we've seen executives. Well, I just want to say,
so in this case, revolving door is the wrong word. But there is definitely there's definitely a progression. Revolving door is a slightly separate term to speak for typically Washington D.C. civilian workforce. So like I know, just watched one walk by who started out at DARPA and then went to civilian and is now working working on the corporate side. And if they get bored with that, they'll go back to DARPA or go back to government elsewhere. That's the revolving door. But there is definitely a progression when you finish out your term as a colonel. It makes total sense that if you're a colonel in charge of airplanes, right, and you really know the procurement process for airplanes for the Air Force, that Boeing would then hire you to help them understand and get a handle on the procurement process so they could sell their planes to the Air Force better. And no individual here is making an evil choice. It's not that Boeing is bad for hiring the most competent person to help them sell their planes to the Air Force. It is not that the colonel's making a bad choice by saying, hey, I'm kind of done. I've been doing this long enough to be a colonel. I want to go do something and make my money on the civilian side. And it's not that the Air Force is doing bad by hiring the best or by buying the best airplanes. Everybody is making the individual correct decision. It's that systemically this is breaking us. And Eisenhower was right.
Hate the game, not the player.
Exactly. Right. The game needs changing. And the people that change the game are our elected representatives. But they're incentivized not to because, again, it's those poor workers in the middle of Pennsylvania or western Pennsylvania who are building the Bradleys and their families who are voting. And if that representative and if those representatives vote to obsolete the Bradley, which I strongly encourage they do, those workers are going to be out of some work and they're going to be voted out of office. So they're sure as shit not going to vote for it. So our system for accountability here is compromised. Not because anybody here is bad, but because everybody here is perversely incentivized, including me, right? I was perversely incentivized. I would love to say that everybody should stay in the military and do their 20 years. But are you kidding? $50,000 or $180? Fuck you, I'm taking the $180.
Oh, that's right. That only makes sense. But isn't this a top-down phenomenon? I mean, I just want to go back to Porter's article for a second here. And he says, the incoming George W. Bush administration gave the system a strong push, bringing in 8 officials from Lockheed Martin, then the largest defense contractor, to fill senior policy-making positions in the Pentagon. The CEO of Lockheed Martin, Peter Teets, was brought in to become Undersecretary of the Air Force and Director of the National Reconnaissance Office, where he had responsibility for acquisition decisions directly benefiting his former company. James Roche, the former Vice President of Northrop Grumman, was named Secretary of the Air Force, and a former Vice President of General Dynamics, Gordon England, was named Secretary of the Navy. Wow. Like, these guys are so connected, and yet they're given the power to write the check now? How does this make any sense? Yeah, like I said,
and that's why I was saying that is a revolving door. The civilian side of Washington, D.C. is when you use that term revolving door. That's why I was checking you on that term. That's that right there. Right. Textbook revolving door. Yes.
So
I
how
would say that would actually be. Go ahead.
How can enlisted men be blamed for taking a tripling in salary, you know? Like, I mean, this is what's going on 20 levels above them. Like you said, this system. But what will change it when this happens at the very top?
Yeah, that, I think, would be where we could do something. We could, you know, while we can sit here and complain all we want, one of the places where I think there is good room for robust institutional change and enough political motivation to maybe see it through would be in rationalizing these rules a little bit. As you stated, the law informs us that defense contractors shouldn't be able to do a job the military can do for itself. It makes no goddamn sense that KBR, a subsidiary of Halliburton, by the way, is doing the job of feeding our soldiers at mess halls overseas when we have perfectly functioning cooks. They're sitting at home without combat patches who've never seen a lick of time over in Kandahar. And they cost, at least in terms of, why are we letting KBR do this? We have our own soldiers that can cook, and we're paying them fucking anyway. So they're already, I don't want to call any soldier a burden on the budget, but they're already paid for. Send them fucking over and let them do the cooking. Why are we having KBR and Halliburton do it? And as you stated, there's a law that says that the military-industrial complex shouldn't be tasked to do anything that is considered to be a mission-critical role. There are some ways that that's definitely been skirted or just outright ignored. I think there are good ways to institutionally force that. Because it's a law on the books, like an enterprising young lawyer could probably just draft a halfway decent lawsuit and figure it out for any aggrieved soldier or aggrieved contractor. Hell, if there's a lawyer out there, contact me and I'll probably find you one. If there's an enterprising lawyer who wants an aggrieved soldier to make the case, we'll find one for you. It's pretty easy. And that would be a decent way that we could start making a dent on this thing. Once the law's on the books, we can start actually doing something about it. And since that would be a good place to start. So, not all hope's lost, is sort of where I'm going here.
Well, I mean, I would like to agree with that. It's just that I find it hard to find any evidence. And it doesn't seem to matter what administration it is, this hollowing out of the biggest portion of the U.S. budget, I see a lot of questions the next time something goes terribly wrong. You know, like, isn't this the way it usually goes in D.C.? The first couple times people get killed or huge fraud is unearthed, it's allowed to skate, but then you never know which thing is going to break the camel's back. Is there a danger of the next big mistake by contractors working for the U.S. military that it will cause a change? Do you think that is more likely to happen before there's actual reform by decision? Like, I'm thinking, think about the WikiLeaks video, killing the journalists. You know, that changed things. It's not like it never happened before, but that one made a change.
Did it change things?
Well, it certainly brought it to the fore. And Abu Ghraib came after and stuff like that. You know, it's an impetus. I'm just thinking.
I don't know if the helicopter video changed anything. That might just be in our part of the internet. Yeah, I'm not aware of it changing anything. I couldn't name a single policy that video changed.
But did it not change the discussion of who was doing what over there, and who was being sacrificed, and whose call was it?
In relation to defense contractors, those were uniformed military and an Apache.
Yes, they were. But the guys on the ground, the journalists, were there with contractors. I'm getting off.
I thought they were a Reuters team embedded with a Jay Shalmati crew.
You're probably
I don't
right.
know. I'd have to look back. It's been a while.
Yes, it has.
I could be wrong. I'm sure somebody who likes WikiLeaks much more than I do is more intimately familiar with the nuances of that than I am.
Regardless, do you think that the next big mistake by contractors acting on behalf of the U.S. military could be the biggest impetus for change rather than Washington doing anything on their own?
I really don't think so. I really can't conceive of a situation where that would be true. The majority of every government building that I walk into is staffed mostly by contractors, whether that's DARPA or Department of Energy or whatever. I don't know what an individual contract could do to change the institutional issue here. I mean, if one crew fucks up like those guys in Blackwater, what tends to happen is that the defense contractor changes their name. When Lincoln Group screwed up in 2008, I believe. I don't know. Somebody can Google it. I joined. They were Lincoln Group. When I got on the plane, they were Focal Worldwide. When I landed, they were Strategic Social. And by the time I left, they were part of Blackwater. And then they were part of Z, and then they were part of Academy. Now, what they do is they just change their name, and nobody knows the difference. That's the way that this typically goes when somebody screws up.
And that is an ability that is inherently in the private sector, not the U.S. military. You can't just change your unit number.
Yeah, right. I know a few who wish they could.
When we look at, I mean, there's been so many stories. I mean, you can go back however far you want. There was the RAH-64 Comanche. There was even the JSF, the F-35, the F-22 Raptor. There's been procurement disasters for decades. Every time one happens, they say they're going to prevent it. They never do. I mean, I myself on this show numerous times have called the F-35 the largest corporate welfare project ever planned and executed. But the human side of it is an entirely different machine. And I think it's much easier to keep it out of the public view. I think with the percentage of contractors being used by the Army, especially right now, proves that you can privatize out human resources and it doesn't get anywhere near the scrutiny that the physical asset programs get, because I guess that's kind of how everything's promoted as well. I mean, when you go to a football game, okay, I'm just going to wrap this. When you go to a football game and you see the Thunderbirds or the Blue Angels fly over the stadium, that's what they want you to remember, not the 8 pilots. They want you to remember the hardware, the picture, the power of it. So, I mean, I understand why arms programs, weapon systems get all the attention. But has there been anything really brought up in any of the committee hearings about how much money is going to the contractors, or are everybody on the committees bought off?
Let me respond to the first little bit there. When it comes to number of individuals, the 8 soldiers and not the 800 million or per plane probably amount of hardware. Contractors are paid by number of seats, and I found this out painfully. I developed a program which sort of, I went into a room and I realized that everybody there was cutting and pasting from Word documents to Excel for the majority of their day. And each of these individuals were contractors that were getting paid roughly about $1.20 a pop. And while they were quote-unquote intel analysts, $120,000 to be sitting in Kabul, essentially cutting and pasting from Word to Excel. And then they would move it from Excel into ArcGIS and sort of geospatial systems to do other cool things with it. But when I realized that like 90% of their day was just moving shit from Word to Excel, I was like, well, this is really stupid. Does nobody know? Isn't nobody here? Know any scripting at all? So I wrote a little quick scripting program. Did it fucking for them. And the contractor, they promoted me out of Kandahar to go up to Kabul to do this. And then when I optimized, and I was like, here, I'm saving you literally 400 man hours a week. You could lay off you could save the government $2 million a month just by using it. I figured exactly what the numbers were, so I'm sort of spitballing here. But it was a lot. I was like, just use this program, and you're going to get the same amount of work done. And as long as the work's being done to task already, this will take care of 90% of the workflow you currently have. So just use this. Have somebody there to do a little bit of data quality control to make sure that it worked right. And then you can do your actual intel analyst work. They got rid of me by promoting me again. And that's how I ended up working with Combined Joint Psychological Operations Task Force and Combined Forces Special Operations Command, was because they wanted me. They were paid by number of seats, number of warm bodies sitting in warm seats. And I was told by the project manager for that organization that if they utilized the tool that I had just provided them, yes, I was saving them enough that they would say there were 100 analysts. They would be able to fire 80 of them, or, I don't know, put them back in America somewhere. It's not like they wouldn't find work elsewhere, particularly at that point in the war. They couldn't do that because they would have to renegotiate the contract because they'd guaranteed the government that they were going to have 100 people in these seats. And even though we were getting the same work, even though we could get the same work done theoretically with 20 people, the corporation would lose the amount of money it took to hire those 100 people, and the overhead they got, 10% or whatever the corporation takes off the top of each of those. So they decided not to do that. So we maintained an inefficient system simply because people, the big wigs at the higher-ups of the military-industrial complex, were paid by number of seats and number of warm bodies sitting in those seats, not by the quality of work. They were paid for bodies, not for the job. And that was really depressing to find out. And I'm pretty sure I've made a lot of people mad by just explaining that in public.
Well, I mean, these things happen, I mean, there have been social programs in Canada, for instance, where that story sounds familiar. There have also been grant programs where that story sounds very familiar. Do you think there's any difference when it hits the military as compared to, say, HUD or Interior or any other federal domain? Is it a bigger deal when it's exposed in the military, or is that just a scapegoat?
I mean, it's a bureaucratic problem, right? I like my shit to run efficiently. If we can do the same job with 20% less people, or same thing, use all 100 of those people, but apply them to actually do intelligence analysis and not be copy-pasting monkeys, we would have a more efficient, better workflow. I just want efficient government. I don't know if I'm the right person to make any comparison between defense and HUD. It's institutionalized in defense, and I think it's probably out of the line of sight of most individuals who don't care about this subject. So yeah, I don't know what to tell you.
Okay, that brings up another question then. Do you think that a sustainable workload for that 100 people to not copy-paste and actually do analysis? Is there enough workload for that ongoing? Like, do you see this as nothing but expanding? Or is that just the nature of the beast? Is there a need or a desire?
The people who designed the contract probably didn't. They either didn't know or didn't care. Either one could be true. I'm not going to ascribe malice where maybe others would. They either didn't know or didn't care that the majority of that copy pasting could be automated with like somebody who knew fucking kindergarten level scripting. I don't expect contract experts to know that. I don't expect the Intel analysts. They're not coders. They're not supposed to know that shit. They were just unlucky that somebody who did know coding walked into the room and was tasked with optimizing their workflow. So I don't know if there was. I mean, I would imagine that having that many eyes on the same problem set, you might end up with a too many cooks problem. Though I imagine a lot of those were just warm seats sitting there to do exactly that, copy and paste for $120K a year, which is a nice gig if you can get it, I guess. I don't know. I don't have a straight answer for you.
All righty. I'm just trying to think of other things that we said we were going to talk about. I mean, the things that I'm somewhat fixated on is just how much money this is costing the United States, and by proxy, costing the citizens of the United States. You know, you mentioned it earlier about deficit and debt, and, you know, I mean, this has been going on for most of my life, and I've yet to see any consequences. You know, it's just like when somebody like Greece pisses off Goldman Sachs, well, yeah, they go bankrupt. But I mean, where's the consequences to the United States or the United Kingdom or Canada or any of these so-called first world countries? It's all just numbers on a piece of paper. But can this go on? Do you think that there is a legitimate need for the size and presence of the U.S. military around the world, or has it now become something that must be maintained to feed this complex? Or is it not that easy? Is it not that easy to call?
Let's just say there's two things there. Is there a legitimate need for the size of the U.S. military, or is it just to feed the complex? Is there a legitimate need for the size of the U.S. military? Maybe. The actual military, not the military-industrial complex. There is a need for, I think, the world's strongest democracy to have the world's strongest military. Maybe in spades. I see a decent argument for that. I'm really happy that the combined might of China and Russia still can't hold a candle to the U.S. alone. That makes me happy. And it makes me feel pretty secure in at least the U.S. defense, if not the entire defense of the Western world. That said, there is a significant amount of fat that can be skimmed off the steak, right? Before we really start to lose anything. And a lot of the waste, fraud, and abuse, to use a military or to use a government term, a lot of the waste, fraud, and abuse is certainly in the military-industrial complex. And having more robust eyes on those issues outside of just the random audits from the IG, which is the Adjutant General, I think that's right, would be probably beneficial to the bottom line of the United States and the bottom line of all of our Western alliances in general. The thing is, when you start cutting this fat, right, like if we can't get these citizens to recognize that we need to cut this fat, and everybody's like, oh yeah, we should totally cut this fat. Tell you what, I'll totally believe that the American people or any Western people will get behind that when I start seeing the people from central Pennsylvania vote themselves out of the jobs that maintain the obsolete Bradley fighter vehicle. When I see them do that, I'll believe that the American people are ready to actually make that change. Until then, part of me strongly believes the individual American says they want reform. This is the same way when they talk about how they hate Congress, but they love their representative. Yeah, they hate pork until it's theirs. When I get the people of central Pennsylvania to stop producing the goddamn monstrosity and death machine that is the Bradley fighting vehicle, then I'll believe that the American people are ready to take this problem seriously and tackle it. I'm sorry, there was a little bit of me on grandstanding, but there it is.
Oh no, that's fine. Do you think that every tool is being used to keep that Western Pennsylvanian worker to keep buying the same product, no matter what reality shows them? Are the defense contractors playing the same game that big oil plays elsewhere, where this is fundamental? It'll just destroy the community. There's just no way we can carry on without this stuff. Is that a big part of it?
In a lot of cases, it would, and particularly, I don't know if Western Central Pennsylvania counts as the Rust Belt, but it's pretty damn close either way. Communities like those in Pennsylvania and Ohio and all the way up and down that sort of section of America know very well that when you take a massive part of the you take a massive industrial complex out of their local ecosystem, those towns shrivel up and die away. Detroit is very infamous for this, right? But so, like, Cincinnati had this, and tons of small cities up and down that sort of section. Pittsburgh definitely had to deal with it, and we're talking about a city, I forget exactly what the city's name was, but it's right outside of Pittsburgh. They know, they have the institutional knowledge that, if they lose the Bradley contract from that part of their world, their small town will probably dry up and die. So I almost can't blame the individual family in that part of the world for voting the way they do. And then you can't blame the representative for feeding the contracts to their constituency, because that's what they're being voted in to do. And you can't blame the military-industrial complex for going there, because that's where the lowest wages to create the damn thing is. Again, it's not the individual. No individual cog in this broke-ass system is evil. The system is evil, right?
No, I agree. I mean, you're just saying that, and I was thinking about why Toyota and BMW and Volkswagen all have plants in the U.S. in where? Alabama and Mississippi.
Yeah, I'm not going to Detroit.
Same thing. There's
too many unions in Detroit.
Indeed.
I don't know if that's actually the reason. I'm kind of spitballing here. I hope someone doesn't get mad at me for that. Yeah.
Well, I'm just going to read one more piece from Gareth Porter's article.
Sure.
In the new permanent war complex, the interests of the arms contractors have increasingly dominated over the interests of the civilian Pentagon and the military services, and dominance has become a new driving force for continued war. Even though these bureaucracies, along with the CIA, seize the opportunity to openly conduct military operations in one country after another, the drone war has introduced a new political dynamic into the war system. The drone makers, who have powerful clout in Congress, can use their influence to block or discourage an end to the permanent war, especially in Afghanistan, which would sharply curtail the demand for drones. Eisenhower was prophetic in his warning about the threat of the original complex to American democracy. But that original complex, organized merely to maximize the production of arms to enhance the power and resources of both the Pentagon and their contractor allies, has become a much more serious menace to the security of the American people than even Eisenhower could have anticipated. Now it is a system of war that powerful arms contractors and their bureaucratic allies may have the ability to maintain indefinitely. And that says in a lot better prose than I was trying to get out what I am afraid of. Will there just be too many happy shareholder meetings in the future to do anything to reel this in? Or will it just go on? What do you think?
Oh, man, you caught me right when I'm in the elevator. I hope you can hear me. Radio check. You got me?
Yeah, I
okay,
got
very
you.
good. Outstanding. No, the individual contractor is not beholden to the shareholder, right? They're beholden to their frontline manager. Whether that's sometimes their frontline manager turns out to be a uniformed person because they're paid to be an intel analyst sitting under some major who's in charge of an intel shop, and they're just the subject matter expert in Palantir, for example. I will say, I do think your reporter there had hitting the drone thing. He's beating that drone drum a little bit too hard for my liking. I would want to check his facts when it comes to whether or not there's been less of a demand for drones. I very much knew the trend to be otherwise, at least in recent years. It might have turned around while I wasn't looking, but that's not my experience. In my experience, we like the drone. We, America, we, the West, tend to prefer drones over sending soldiers on the ground. And that's a whole different debate, right? Sorry, sort of went on a rant there. I lost the original thread. What was the original question?
Yeah, Porter did say that the contractors are using their allies in Congress to completely discourage leaving Afghanistan, because that would be a severe reduction in the use of drones. And they're not into that. I mean, General Dynamics has their own MQ-9s there now. They are unarmed, but they're used as targeting vehicles for manned missions. But they are completely operated by people from General Dynamics. And the Judge Advocate report said that this could be a serious problem. But yet, it goes on. I think what Porter said in his article, what he tried to get across in the last half of it was the propensity of the drone war has really solidified this system of the lobbying, the congressional support, I'll put it that way. This is a new factor in this game of the complex, and it's a very, very powerful one. And he's just go ahead.
I don't know if drones are the most deciding factor about how the military-industrial complex goes. I doubt drones make up too much of, I don't know what too much is, but I don't think they make up a super significant portion of the defense budget going to contractors.
Last year it was about
they play a critical
total.
Yeah, out of it's $1.1 trillion budget. So $500 billion would be, if we're going to say 50% of that goes to contractors. But we'll ballpark the total defense budget going to contractors at $500 billion. Of those, if we're say $8 billion is for drones, the military cannot produce its own drones. Makes total sense that we're paying the civilian sector to create those drones and for the expertise in their creation of those. I would prefer that soldiers be the ones piloting them. They have in the past. I don't know why they wouldn't do it moving forward. I don't think drones make up as much of a significant threat as that article would lead us to believe. That's sort of my intuitive thought on that.
All right. I understand that. But as we go forward, and like everything else in vulture capitalism, 21st century, we see companies like Boeing, $38 billion for their military arm last year, Lockheed, Raytheon, General Atomics, General Dynamics, the same Booz Allen Hamilton we haven't mentioned, strangely enough, Halliburton.
Yeah, how have we not gotten here yet? Booz Allen Hamilton, yeah, keep going.
You know, and their contracts continue to rise year after year after year. And amazingly enough, so do the conflicts. I mean, this is kind of what I was trying to get to before when I said, is there going to be some calamitous act that is going to finally change this road? Because, you know, I mean, like you said, 17 years in Afghanistan. What exactly is the threat there? Well, you know, there are some that say the poppy fields are why still there, but what is the point? Is there a military point to this anymore? Or is it just maintaining business relationships?
It goes a lot of different ways. And kind of touches close to home. The reason why I joined, I was against the war, particularly in Iraq, yet I was there twice. The reason why I was okay with going, you know, in uniform or otherwise, was sort of a you break it, you buy it mentality. Do you think we have some sort of moral obligation to the Afghan people to maintain until some stability is reached? I don't know at what point we should cut that off, whether that point's been reached or not. I don't think that's for me to say. I think that's for the American people to say, or for all the NATO peoples to say. And to the other point, I don't see a one-to-one connection yet. And maybe it exists, and I've got blinders on. But I don't see a one-to-one connection between the people who pay for these pork barrelings are senators. The people who are authorizing these conflicts are the president, with some congressional support, sure. The use of was it the UMA? Authorized use of military force, whatever it is. That's it. Yeah. Too many acronyms, right? But I don't see a one-to-one comparison. I don't think the military contractors are yet. I think I said this when we were talking offline. I don't yet see a comparison between, or a one-to-one connection between the contractors and us getting into conflict. I don't think we're getting into conflict at contractors' behest. Maybe we are, and I've just had the wool pulled over my eyes. And maybe we will be. It's certainly something to be conscious of and cognizant of and watch for. And I would support anybody being conscious and cognizant and being the watchdog for those sorts of things. But I don't think General Dynamics is deciding when we go to war and with whom. Still seems like that is the purview of the American people or all the NATO peoples, depending on the conflict, and the military-industrial complex just obliges them.
Yeah.
I would much more prefer that the individual American or the individual civilian actually feel the burden of war the same way the damn soldiers do. It's not like World War II when they all felt ration cards and had to give up rubber for the war effort. These days, we can have a 17-year-long war, and nobody gives a damn. They still get their McDonald's.
That is a very important point. Very important. And that's what has changed, and maybe that's what is behind a lot of the, frankly, blasé reaction to conflicts going on this long. I mean, as Eisenhower said, in the first half of the 20th century, 4 wars with the world's powers. And, I was like, holy shit, what the fuck are we doing? And now, and I mean, we have all these other conflicts. Desensitization was not supposed to happen with proliferation of the internet, but it seems to be happening anyway. Oh, God. What the hell? No, I just forgot what I was going to bring up. God damn it.
Yeah, I mean, but even so, for those of us who aren't desensitized, I'm very passionate about war. I really don't think we should go unless we ought to. But we'll take a conflict that we don't really hear much about these days, Yemen. I really don't want Saudi Arabia doing what they're doing in Yemen. I really don't want U.S. dollars going to support a Saudi Arabia conflict in Yemen. At the same time, I don't want Iran supporting the Houthis to mine the goddamn strait so we can't get any shipping in and out of there. This is...
Well, I mean, that's the game, though, Would the Iranians stop mining it if the American support left? It's the game of chicken.
No. Fuck no, they wouldn't. Yeah, because Ayatollah Khomeini has been totally reasonable up to this point. No, you keep at it.
But again, that is absolute proof of what's happening in Yemen. I mean, depending on what you choose to see on the internet, it is an extremely dire situation. That's an understatement. It is horrific, but it goes on, It goes on. And of course, there's money being made. There's certainly money being spent by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, but not like that's ever been a problem. Is there, okay, here it is. Is there spillover into the info entertainment side of the world to minimize these conflicts that are far, far away, that involve directly very few American lives, but yet American corporations are making a lot of money from? Is there a conscious effort of the system to minimize these things so, people don't really ask questions?
When you phrased that last sentence, I was about to say I don't know, but that last sentence I can firmly agree with. Yes, and a very clear example of that would be that we are cycling out soldiers and cycling in contractors for the exact same reason that I stated previously, that contractors don't show up in casualty sheets. You don't care when 4 Canadian contractors die, but your country will raise holy hell if 4 uniformed Canadians die.
True.
And that's absolutely true in America as well. Probably significantly more so. Yes, there is, and I think that's part of the political price we were talking about previously. There's very little political price to the death of a contractor. There is very significant political price to the death of a soldier, particularly as these wars are more or less winding down, where we have less and less uniform deaths. I bet we have more and more contractor deaths, but I don't know what those numbers are, and I don't think they're easy to come across. I don't even know if they're officially tallied anywhere.
Yeah. Well, maybe DNI knows. That's about it.
I'm sure somebody does. They just won't. It's not something that they're going to put on the front page of the Washington Post, mostly because nobody would give a damn, sadly.
Yeah, in the general sense, yes. And the reason that it would be redacted after a FOIA request takes probably a year you get back a white piece of paper with a big black block in the middle of it, is because there are people that want to know. All the competitors want to know who's getting how much money and how they can work in on that scene. Halliburton, especially.
No. So you're wrong there. You're actually very wrong there.
What?
The amount that each contractor is getting when they win a bid is immediately made public to anybody who wants to know it the minute they win the bid. The way do you want to know sort of how the sausage is made on how someone gets a contract? I can tell you.
Sure.
So generally what happens sort of depends. I'm going to give you the very, very, very basic rundown. So if you're a contract officer and you're listening to this, don't yell at me. I'm giving them the basics. The general idea is that the military identifies some need, whatever that need is. Whether it's for cooks, I don't know why the fuck we need cooks, because we have plenty in the military, but that's neither here nor there. Whether it's for cooking details or whether it's for planes that meet these certain specifications or a new weapon system, which the military keeps promising but never delivers. Then the contractors who have demonstrated usually some amount of work previously in doing that type of business will bid, and the lowest bidder wins. That's why you hear that term lowest bidder all the time. And then the bid is made public. The government, and that's why you see government has awarded Lockheed $4.5 billion. That is typically because, I don't know, Boeing put in like a $5.5 billion bid, and they just lost out. Lockheed said they could do it for cheaper. So that's generally how that goes. There's also such thing as no-compete contracts, which are a little bit weirder. Those are typically where the government knows that only one company can do the job. Like, say, only one company knows how to run Palantir, and that's Palantir. That's not so much true these days, but again, being simple. But in general, that's why you have the term lowest bidder, and that's sort of how that sausage is made.
Okay, well, that's pretty standard. But I mean, even that simple process is by no means exempt from these huge games. I mean, with the latest air-to-air refueling tanker project, KCX, so it's KC-67 now, Pegasus, I believe. I mean, first it was awarded.
I hate that you keep going to the Air Force because I don't know a damn thing about it. Keep going.
Well, I'll just cover then. But I mean, it was awarded to an Airbus consortium, I believe, with Northrop Grumman, and then Boeing put in a complaint and, spent $10-20 million on the hearing process, and they won, and a new RFP was issued to be more clear, apparently, and it turned out that Northrop Grumman said, yeah, no, we're out of here. We see where the wind's blowing here. And Boeing wanted that contract. They lost the first bid. They got it overturned. They won the second bid.
Happens all the time. I've personally been involved in those. I know how they go. Yes. But it happens pretty much with every contract.
This is the thing. Even with a straightforward process, it's never straightforward. There's always something else. And
once the winner is announced, the opposing parties have a chance to contest the awarding of the bid. It's very much it's part of the process. It's built in, right? But the objective here is to try to give the American people the best deal possible. So you do want the competing opponents to have a chance to contest that the bidding process was unfair, that there was something going on here. That's to reduce any chance for there to be allegedly, it's there to reduce any chance for corruption. I'm not saying eliminating, because I don't think any of us believe it's completely eliminated, but I do think it helps reduce it. I think it's probably fair to say it does.
Well, I can understand that is the reason in the statute for that part of the process. But do you think that's how it's being deployed? The Boeing win would say no, because once it was a new RFP and Northrop Grumman withdrew, Boeing pretty much had a clear path. And guess what? The price went up quite a bit. So they really did get what they wanted. So were they really looking out for the American taxpayer?
I don't know I don't know the specifics of that contract, but it does sometimes happen. An example that I've seen personally, two contractors were fighting over the atmospherics program in Iraq, which at the time was called IQATF. I don't think I'm giving away any secrets here. I gotta watch my words. The original owner of the contract lost the bid. It was funny. They contacted me for a job like just this week. I was like, you motherfuckers. No, I know you. But they lost the bid. They were outbidded by somebody else, and then they contested it. Because they had the contract beforehand, they knew what the government wanted, whereas maybe the person who designed the contract wasn't quite really aware of what the government wanted, right? You would like to think that they did, but bureaucracy. And so the original holder of the contract went back to the government and said, hey, we're contesting this bid. We've been doing this for a while. We know what you really want. Here's what the contract should have said, and we want to recompete. And so that went into a recompete arbitration. I don't know what the right words are. I'm not a contract guy. I just happen to have been around it enough for a while until the government decided, no, we actually we did mean what we said when we wrote the new contract, your contestation for this bid is thrown out. I could totally see how that could have gone the other way. If, say, for instance, Boeing has had the contract for a while, really knows what the government wants. Some dude who isn't super adept at airplanes wrote the contract. I could see how Lockheed would be like, yo, we know what you meant, and you meant this. Boeing, we bid on what we knew that you wanted, not what the contract said you wanted. I could see reason for that to be reasonable. I understand that it looks funky on the inside. I'm trying to give all the players here the benefit of the doubt. How about that? So, that's,
well, I guess
I'm trying to explain how it could be reasonable.
Okay. But, I guess, we don't want to limit long-term career opportunities with an off-the-cuff statement either.
Oh, no, the people who lost the aquatic contract are never going to hire me. They can go fuck themselves.
Well, that's good to hear. Will there be any serious effort from the new House coming in the new year to do anything about the annual NDAA that just gets larger and larger and larger every year? Do you see any brakes being put on U.S. defense spending?
This House? Not at all. Nobody.
The new House
I'm
coming
aware
in January.
Made that. Yeah, I know. Nobody in this House campaigned on defense spending. Really, they all campaigned on anti-Trump. No one's going to give a shit about defense this go around. Maybe in future years, but not this time around. And Democrats, not really well known for being fiscally responsible. I love you, Dems. I'm one of you, but not really well known for it.
Well, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, there's no incentive to be financially responsible if you're running the federal government. There's just no case history. It's not a requirement of the job.
Well, it's not a requirement for any government anywhere. It is always the benefit of a ruler of any society to borrow as much money as you can and pass on that debt to to the people coming after you. Why? If you don't, somebody else will just promise more and they'll get elected. Again, this is the perversion of the system. And it's not the individual leader's fault. The individual leader needs to borrow as much as he can. Otherwise, somebody else is going to promise more, therefore borrow more, and get elected. In democracies, get elected. Or in dictatorships, be more likely to rise to power because he promised whoever the keys to power were more shit. In all systems of government, it is always to the leader's advantage to borrow as much as they can. But that isn't unique to democracies or dictatorships.
If we agree that... Go ahead.
I was going to say, at least in democracies, the people have a chance to maybe wake up and be like, yeah, maybe we should have a reasonable budget. I don't know if they will, but they could vote for it if they wanted to. Until they vote for reasonable budgets, they're not going to get them. But again, that involves the people in Pennsylvania to vote themselves out of their own self-interest. They'll vote their own small town to die. And I don't know anybody who would do that. Even if they say they hate pork barrel. Everybody hates pork barrel until it benefits them.
The ultimate NIMBY. Not in my backyard.
It's a systems problem. Everybody here, outside of some corrupt examples, and there are plenty, most people in these systems are operating in good faith and doing the right things for their own individual circumstance. Systemically, we have issues. I think
absolutely
getting your listeners' heads around that maybe tones down the rhetoric a little bit, helps them understand the circumstance a little bit better. I'm curious, by the way, have we had any callers, or do we want to open phone lines? I don't know how long you want to go.
Well, we had 3 different listeners. They seemed to be on for about half an hour and then drop and then call back. You know, probably usage or something like that. Who knows? But no, nobody's put up their hand. What I wanted to ask you was, we see the pattern. We see the ingrained conveyor belt that's working now. We've established where the institutional knowledge is moving to, not where it's always been. What do you see the effect on capability of executing missions, of delivering the results that politicians want?
I think, as I said in the beginning, my biggest concern is largely that the skimming the cream of the crop from the military and bringing them into the military. I'm in the elevators. So if I cut out, let me know. But bringing them into the military-industrial complex leads to the B and C squad training the next generation of soldiers. And this is a downward cycle. This happened to Rome, by the way. Rome started out and actually used exactly the same. Well, Romans initially were tough motherfuckers who beat their plows into spears and swords and went and fought their own wars. As their empire grew, the people of Rome stopped fighting their own wars, and somewhere near the middle of the, we're going to say about 250 AD, give or take, the Romans stopped fighting their own wars. You still have me?
Yep.
Okay. The Romans stopped fighting their own wars. They gave the benefits of they gave the job of fighting wars to Germanic mercenaries. They had their own military-industrial complex. Romans no longer gave a damn about fighting their own fights. They gave their fights off to other people. And I think it's not the reason why the Roman Empire fell, but it was certainly part of it. We are in the start of a very similar cycle, I think. And as the Eisenhower speech that you spoke about demonstrated, we would prefer to be a people who can, when needed, beat our plows into swords. We don't want to be a people who rely on mercenaries to do our shit for us. The people who do that are the French, and they have the French Foreign Legion, and we know how well they are at war. And the Romans. And they're gone. It's a bad call. Systemically, it's a bad call. It might be a good call individually at the time, but it's a bad call systemically for the long-term health of the Union.
And by proxy, the long-term health of NATO?
Absolutely. No, I know that this has been a U.S.-centric discussion, but this applies across NATO.
Yeah, there's no country that's immune to this sort of system.
Well, there's certainly no NATO country immune to this system.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I wonder if it could be argued, and I'm kind of spitballing here, the way that we think about war in organizations is very hierarchical, us in the Western world. I had this discussion a lot when it comes to Russian propaganda and even counterterrorism. We think that those who fight war are uniformed for a military, which is fine because we're the ones with the best military. Those in other organizations don't necessarily think that way. It wasn't the Russians that invaded Ukraine. There were green men with maybe some Russians on vacation, right? Yeah. Other systems are not as uniformly in lockstep as we tend to be. And it pisses us off to no end. I don't know where I'm going with that, but there it is.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting angle. I mean, it certainly enhances other fuckery going on elsewhere. I mean, that's been talked about on this show a million times about that F word coming into play and the cooperation of the media, which is no longer independent for the most part, but,
I think I've been a guest for those shows.
I think the last time you were on was a net neutrality show.
It's been a while.
That was January 2017.
Oh, wow. You just had that Googled up?
Well, I went back and looked because I wanted to see if there's any pictures I could steal from that one for this one.
Oh, okay. You got a decent one. I like more or less the same.
Well, I understand your long-term outlook, and I agree. And I think Rome is an excellent metaphor, indeed. It's just a matter, I guess, of how long can this go on? I mean, as you said, the levers exist just so very few choose to pull a lever. Is anything going to change it?
Our benefit is that the levers exist. The levers are the people.
Yeah.
The people have to make the votes. That's what changes it. How you mobilize and influence the people in such a way to make significant changes, to get it so the military cooks its own goddamn food anymore, which is my favorite example of waste, fraud, and abuse. I think it's up to the people. The other ways are to pressure the legal system, to use the laws that are already on the books to say, hey, there's a law that says that it's illegal for contractors to do things that government can do for itself. So what the fuck are all these contractors doing? Decent lawyers could probably make that argument. I don't know anyone who has, and it might be suicide for their career, but I think we know a few Stanley Cohens of the world who might be willing to make such a case. So there's hope yet. There are silver linings here. Not that I don't know how we get from where we are to those points.
Yeah.
But we in the West are unique in that we still have those levers, whereas autocratic or dictatorial societies, and those that are more oligarchical than ours arguably are, they don't have those decisions. So there are silver linings. They aren't great. I don't have. I have faith in democracy, insofar as when the going gets tough, democracies seem to be the right way to go. I don't know how long it'll take democracies to get there, but unlike in other systems of government, we do have those levers. Whether they get pulled or not, I think remains to be seen. Hopefully we don't go bankrupt in the process.
Well, that's a whole nother show. Holy shit.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we got a little more than 2 minutes left in the 2 hours. Anything else you'd like to say? I don't know.
No, I feel like we've hit most of the key points I wanted to talk about. Do you feel like we hit everything?
Yeah, I think so. I mean,
wow.
I thank you for coming on to give a little more ground level insight into what things not only appear to be, but what they really are. And I've always found that to be a very powerful angle. It's not just what you see on TV about decisions and contracts and handshakes. It's about how it works out at the other end of the line. You know, and like the arguments you made about the jobs that maintains the striker and everything else. It's
the Bradley
like
fighting vehicle. The striker replaces the Bradley. Yeah.
Sorry.
The striker's the good one. The Bradley's the bad one.
But as you said, especially in a quote-unquote capitalist society, the individual choices are plain. They're obvious. What do you expect people to do? But the systemic aggregate has given us a perverted system. I think perverted's accurate.
Yeah, I think that's ultimately the point. No individual in this system, typically, there are exceptions, but no individual in this system typically is evil. The vast majority of people doing this are good, patriotic individuals who love Western society and who are just making the best economic decision to do what they love to do, which is typically defending Western society. And I don't begrudge any individual for the decisions they are making. I do begrudge the system that we have imposed on ourselves that put us in this situation. And the way to break the system is probably through the voting booth. I don't know if we're going to get there, but we could.
All right, fair enough. And we just went about a minute in overtime. So good for us. We did it.
Yay! Good stuff.
All right, John, thank you for joining me this evening. And people out there at WVU Alpha Soldier, correct?
That's correct. That's Whiskey Victor Uniform Alpha, all spelled out. Soldier.
Bueno. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir. Good to hear you again.
You too. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We'll see you next week on The View Up Here. Good night.